In the darkness between stars, where ancient Sith lords carved empires from blood and ambition, there existed a being whose name would echo across 5,000 years of galactic history. A Dark Lord so powerful, so consumed by his vision of conquest, that he nearly brought the Republic itself to its knees. His fleets descended upon unsuspecting worlds like a crimson tide. His Massassi warriors knew no mercy. His command of the dark side bent reality itself to his will. But this is not a story of triumph. This is a chronicle of pride, betrayal, and the terrible price of absolute ambition. For Naga Sadow's reign would ignite the first great war between Sith and Republic, a conflict so devastating that it shattered his golden empire into ruins and sent him fleeing into exile on a forgotten jungle moon, where his body would sleep for millennia, while his spirit corrupted generations yet unborn. On the ancient Sith world of Korriban, beneath skies the color of blood, two rivals prepared to duel for the greatest prize in the galaxy. Only one would ascend to become Dark Lord. Only one would command the loyalty of the Sith people. But neither understood that their conflict would unleash forces that would destroy everything they sought to protect. A duel interrupted by a ghost. A republic discovered by accident. A young explorer seduced by promises of power, betraying his own people, only to find redemption in the most unexpected way. And at the center of it all, a Dark Lord whose ambition knew no bounds and whose pride would accept no defeat. Tonight we journey 5,000 years into the past to witness the rise and catastrophic fall of Dark Lord Naga Sadow, a tale of galactic war, forbidden power, and the thin line between vision and madness, from his ascension in the Valley of the Dark Lords to his eternal sleep beneath the temples of Yavin. For his story shaped the very foundations of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the stories I bring you. And here is something fascinating. 64% of the people who watch these videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy journeys into Star Wars legends, your subscription truly helps this channel grow and bring you more forgotten tales from that galaxy far, far away. Drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always love seeing the global community that gathers here for these epic narratives. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum. Get comfortable under your blanket, and let's travel back to an age when the Sith Empire stood at its zenith, golden and terrible, moments before its greatest son would lead it into ruin. 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, before the rise of Darth Vader, before the Clone Wars, before even the old Republic as history remembers it, there existed an empire that has faded into legend, the Sith Empire. Not the pale imitation that would rise in later ages, but the original civilization, ruled not by fallen Jedi, but by the pure-blooded Sith species themselves, a people born of the dark side, shaped by it, commanding it as naturally as breathing. Their territory stretched across the Outer Rim, hidden from the Republic by the vast emptiness of unexplored space. At the heart of this empire lay Korriban, the ancestral homeworld, a desert planet where the Valley of the Dark Lords held the tombs of every Sith ruler who had ever lived. Massive pyramids of black stone rose from rust-colored sands, each one a monument to power and a repository of forbidden knowledge. The very ground thrummed with dark side energy, accumulated over thousands of years of Sith sorcery and ritual. To walk Korriban's surface was to feel the weight of countless dark side spirits watching, judging, waiting. Zeost served as the administrative capital, a world of frozen tundras and palaces carved from black ice that never melted. Here the Sith Council convened in halls where the temperature could kill an unprotected human in minutes, but the Sith Lords barely noticed the cold. Their blood ran hot with the dark side. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting crimson light across throne rooms where the fate of species was decided with casual cruelty. Chutos, Relg, Cardelba. Dozens of worlds bowed before Sith rule. On every planet, the hierarchy remained absolute. At the apex stood the Dark Lords, Sith purebloods of ancient lineage, who commanded the Force with terrifying mastery. Below them served the Massassi, a warrior subspecies bred and shaped through generations of Sith alchemy into the perfect soldiers. 7 feet tall, their crimson skin marked with ritual tattoos, they knew only loyalty and war, and below them, the slaves. Humans, captured in ancient conflicts, now serving in every capacity from menial labor to concubines, their descendants knowing nothing but Sith domination. This was the golden age of the Sith, an empire at its height, powerful and stable, having known a century of unbroken peace under one ruler. Dark Lord Marka Ragnos, whose reign of 100 years had brought the Sith to the zenith of their civilization. A century without major war, without succession crisis, without internal collapse. The old Dark Lord had ruled with such absolute authority that none dared challenge him, and under his iron stability the Sith had prospered. But now, in the year 5000 before Yavin, Marka Ragnos lay dying. Age had finally come for even him. And as word spread across Sith space that the Dark Lord's life force was fading, the Empire trembled. For 100 years, there had been certainty. Now there was only the terrifying question, who would succeed him? Power vacuums in the Sith Empire did not resolve peacefully. History taught that lesson in blood. When a Dark Lord fell without a clear successor, civil war inevitably followed. Fleets would clash in orbit above sacred worlds, temples would burn, the Massassi would be divided, forced to choose masters, entire planets might be devastated before a victor emerged. Every ambitious Sith Lord across the Empire began positioning, gathering supporters, making alliances. But 2 names rose above all others, spoken in whispers in the corridors of power, debated in council chambers, feared in the slave quarters, Ludo Kresh and Naga Sadow. Both were lords of ancient lineage, both commanded vast territories and loyal warriors, both possessed mastery of the dark side that few could match, and both wanted the throne with an intensity that made the air crackle with tension whenever they occupied the same room. Ludo Kresh represented tradition. Older, experienced, cautious by Sith standards, he believed the Empire's strength lay in preserving what they had. The Sith should remain hidden from the Republic, should consolidate their power, should not risk discovery by an enemy that potentially outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. His estates on Seduced spoke to old wealth, old power, old ways that had kept the Sith strong for millennia. Naga Sadow represented something more dangerous. Vision. Born of mixed Sith bloodlines, some whispered his ancestry was not entirely pure, though none dared say it loudly. He ruled from estates on Kar Shian, a moon known for its scholars and innovators, rather than warriors and traditionalists. Sadow looked at the Empire and saw not perfection but potential. The Sith were strong, yes, but they could be stronger. They were hidden, yes, but they could rule openly. The galaxy itself could be theirs, if only they had the courage to reach out and take it. Isolation was not safety, it was stagnation, and stagnation was death. The philosophical divide between them represented more than personal ambition. It was a fundamental question about the Sith future. Would they remain as they were, powerful but limited, or would they risk everything to become something greater? The answer would be decided soon. Marka Ragnos's funeral was approaching, and at that funeral tradition demanded that the succession be settled. One way or another, the Sith Empire would have a new Dark Lord. The only question was whether the Empire would survive the choosing. In the shadows of Korriban's ancient tombs, in the frozen halls of Seduced, In the meditation chambers of 100 Sith fortresses, dark side practitioners consulted their visions, seeking glimpses of what was to come. The Force itself seemed to hold its breath, sensing that the galaxy stood at a turning point. What happened in the days ahead would echo across thousands of years. Empires would rise and fall from the consequences. Countless trillions would live or die, based on whose vision prevailed. And none of them, not Kresh with his cautious wisdom, not Sadow with his soaring ambition, not even the dying Marco Ragnos himself, could possibly foresee how catastrophically wrong everything was about to go. The Valley of the Dark Lords had never seen such a gathering. Every significant Sith from across the Empire descended upon Korriban for the funeral of Marco Ragnos. Their ships filled the sky above the valley, casting shadows over the ancient tombs. Dark Lords arrived with their personal guards, their banners displaying house symbols that stretched back millennia. The Massassi warriors stood in perfect formations, their crimson skin gleaming under Korriban's harsh sun, awaiting orders from masters who might change within the hour. The funeral itself was a spectacle designed to inspire both reverence and fear. Ragnos's body lay in state before his tomb, dressed in the full ceremonial armor of his office. His sarcophagus had been carved from a single piece of black stone, its surface covered in Sith runes that pulsed with residual dark side energy. Slaves swung censers filled with burning incense, the smoke carrying the acrid smell of rare spices meant to honor the dead and invoke the presence of ancient Sith spirits. Thousands watched as the high priests performed the traditional rites, their voices rising in chants that predated written history. The ritual would culminate in sealing the tomb, adding Ragnos to the eternal line of Dark Lords who had shaped Sith civilization. But everyone present knew the ceremony was merely theater. The real drama would come after, when the question of succession could no longer be avoided. As the priests completed the final invocations, Ludo Kresh stepped forward. His movement was calculated, his timing perfect. This was the traditional moment when a successor could stake their claim, and Kresh had spent weeks preparing his words. His voice carried across the assembled crowd with the authority of age and experience. He spoke of tradition, of the wisdom passed down through generations. The Sith Empire had endured for thousands of years, by remaining hidden, by perfecting their arts in isolation, by not drawing the attention of the Republic. That massive government sprawled across the galaxy with resources the Sith could never match. To reveal themselves would be to invite destruction. Ragnos had understood this. Every great Dark Lord before him had understood this. The path forward was clear. Preserve what they had built, strengthen their defenses, perfect their knowledge, but above all remain unseen. Many of the older Dark Lords nodded in agreement. Kreish's argument resonated with those who remembered the old ways, who valued stability over expansion. His support was substantial, perhaps even a majority of those present. But then Naga Sadow moved to the center of the gathering. Where Kresh had been measured and controlled, Sadow radiated intensity. His eyes swept across the crowd, seeming to evaluate each individual. When he spoke, his voice carried a different kind of power. Not the authority of tradition, but the magnetism of possibility. He painted a picture of a galaxy that could be theirs. The Republic was vast, yes, but it was also complacent. It had known peace for so long that it had grown soft, its fleets more ceremonial than functional. The Jedi, those Force users who served the light, were few in number and scattered across thousands of worlds. The Republic had forgotten that threats existed beyond their borders. They had no idea the Sith Empire even existed. That ignorance was an opportunity, perhaps the greatest opportunity the Sith would ever have. But beyond tactical advantages, Sadow argued something more fundamental. The dark side itself demanded expansion. To remain static was to betray the very nature of their power. The Force flowed, it grew, it consumed. A Sith who did not seek greater power was a Sith who had already begun to die. An empire that did not expand was an empire in decay. Isolation was not safety. It was a slow death, a gradual weakening, until some future threat discovered them and found them unprepared. The younger Dark Lords responded to this vision. Those who had grown restless during the long peace, who practiced their combat techniques against training dummies and dreamed of real conquest. Sadow was offering them purpose, glory, a chance to prove themselves as their ancestors had. The debate between the two escalated rapidly. Kresh called Sadow reckless, a half-breed whose mixed ancestry made him unfit to understand true Sith wisdom. Sadow called Kresh a coward, an old man clinging to power he lacked the vision to use properly. The insults grew sharper. The gathered Dark Lords took sides, shouting support for their chosen candidate. The Massassi warriors gripped their weapons, uncertain which master they would soon be serving. Then Ludo Kresh ignited his lightsaber. The crimson blade hummed to life, and the message was clear. This would not be settled with words. Naga Sadow's weapon followed a heartbeat later, its own red glow reflecting off the polished stone of Ragnos's tomb. The duel began before Ragnos's unsealed sarcophagus, a battle that would determine the future of the Sith species. Kresh fought with Form 3, the defensive style perfected over his long life. Every movement was economical, precise, designed to conserve energy and exploit openings. His blade moved in tight arcs, never overextending, always maintaining perfect center guard. He was patient, waiting for Sadow's youth and passion to create a mistake he could exploit. Sadow attacked with ferocity. His style was aggressive, each strike carrying the full weight of his conviction. He used the environment, telekinetically hurling stones from nearby tombs, forcing Kresh to divide his attention between the blade and the barrage of debris. Lightning crackled from his fingertips in brief bursts, testing Kresh's defenses, looking for any weakness. The duel raged across the valley floor. Ancient monuments that had stood for millennia cracked under the impact of their powers. The ground itself split where their force abilities clashed. The watching crowd pressed back, giving the combatants room, sensing the raw power being unleashed. Kresh's experience showed, as he weathered Sadow's initial assault, his breathing remained controlled while Sadow began to show signs of exertion. The older Dark Lord saw his opening approaching. One more exchange, perhaps two, and Sadow's guard would drop enough for a killing strike. But as Sadow pressed forward, driving Kresh back toward Ragnos's tomb, something impossible happened. The sealed sarcophagus cracked, not from any external force but from within. A sound like thunder rolled across the valley, and every Sith present felt a surge in the force so powerful it drove many to their knees. The lid of Ragnos's sarcophagus shattered. Fragments of black stone exploded outward, and from the tomb rose a figure composed entirely of dark side energy. Marka Ragnos's spirit, his presence so powerful that death itself could not contain it. The ghost towered over the gathered Sith, larger than life, exactly as the Dark Lord had appeared in his prime. His spectral form crackled with energy, and when he spoke, his voice resonated in the minds of every being present. The duel stopped. Both Kresh and Sadow froze, their weapons lowering involuntarily. No living Sith could defy the direct command of Marka Ragnos, even in death. The spirit's gaze swept across the two rivals, seeming to peer into their very souls, weighing something beyond mortal understanding. Then Ragnos spoke, his judgment. The words were few, but absolute. He declared that both warriors had shown strength, both had shown conviction, but the future demanded vision more than caution. The galaxy was changing in ways neither could fully perceive. The Sith would face trials ahead that would test everything they believed. For this new age, they needed not a guardian of the old ways, but a pathfinder willing to venture into the unknown. Naga Sadow was declared the new Dark Lord of the Sith. The spirit's pronouncement left no room for debate. As quickly as it had manifested, Ragnos's ghost dissipated, returning to whatever plane of existence harbored such powerful force spirits. The shattered tomb stood empty once more, but the message was unmistakable. The dead had chosen, and the living must obey. Ludo Kresh stood frozen, his lightsaber hanging limply in his hand. In a single moment, everything he had fought for had been stripped away. The other Dark Lords who had supported him looked away, unwilling to be associated with the losing side. In Sith culture, there was no honor in defeat, only the survivor's imperative to endure. Naga Sadow deactivated his weapon and approached Kresh. For a moment it seemed he might offer reconciliation, might extend a hand to bring his rival into the new administration. But Kresh's eyes held nothing but hatred. He bowed, because tradition demanded it, but the gesture was mechanical, empty of any true submission. He spoke the ritual words of acknowledgement, his voice barely above a whisper, then turned and walked away without waiting to be dismissed. The coronation proceeded immediately. Sadow was dressed in the traditional robes of office, ancient garments that had been worn by Dark Lords stretching back to the founding of the Empire. The Sith Council, those Dark Lords who held permanent seats regardless of who ruled, swore their oaths of loyalty. The Massassi commanders pledged their warriors to his service. The ritual was ancient and binding, enforced by both law and the dark side itself. But even as the celebration began, even as Sadow stood before the assembled might of the Sith Empire and accepted their homage, a tension remained. Those who had supported Kresh went through the motions, but their loyalty was questionable. The Empire was divided in a way it had not been in a century. Half the Dark Lords present resented Sadow's ascension. They believed Kresh had been right, that expansion would bring disaster, that Ragnos's ghost had made a terrible mistake. Naga Sadow felt their doubt, standing there in robes, still warm from their previous owner, receiving bows from Sith Lords whose thoughts he could sense screaming resistance. He understood that title alone would not unite the Empire. He needed something more, a crisis that would force unity, an external threat that would make internal divisions irrelevant, an opportunity so compelling that even his detractors would have no choice but to follow. He would not have to wait long. Even as the funeral ceremony concluded and the gathered Sith began returning to their respective worlds, fate was already in motion. Far across the galaxy, in Republic space, two young explorers were making final preparations for a hyperspace jump that would change galactic history forever. Weeks passed after the coronation. Naga Sadow worked tirelessly from his fortress on Kashyyyk, attempting to consolidate power that felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He issued orders that were followed slowly. If at all, he called councils where Dark Lords arrived late and left early. He proposed initiatives that died in committee, strangled by bureaucratic resistance from Kresh's faction. The title of Dark Lord was his, granted by the ghost of Marka Ragnos himself, but the reality of power remained frustratingly elusive. Ludo Kresh had retreated to Ziost and made no secret of his continued opposition. He did not openly rebel. That would have been too dangerous, but he undermined Sadow at every opportunity. He spoke to other Dark Lords, reminding them of the dangers of expansion, painting vivid pictures of Republic fleets descending on Sith worlds. He questioned Sadow's ancestry in private conversations, suggesting that mixed blood meant divided loyalties. He was patient, playing a long game, waiting for Sadow to make a mistake that would justify removing him. Sadow understood the game being played. He needed to act decisively, to do something so bold that it would force the Empire to unite behind him. But what? He could not simply attack Kashyyyk directly. That would trigger the civil war he was trying to avoid, splitting the Empire into factions that would tear each other apart. He needed an external threat, something from outside that would make internal divisions seem petty and dangerous. He spent long hours in meditation, seeking guidance from the Force, looking for an opportunity that his visions told him was coming. The dark side whispered to him of changes approaching, of destinies intersecting, of a moment that would reshape everything. He just had to be patient and ready to seize it when it arrived. That moment came from the most unexpected direction imaginable. From the Republic itself. Gav and Jory Darragon had grown up on the lower levels of Sinagar, capital of the Empress Teta system. They were twins, inseparable since birth, orphaned young when their parents died in a cargo freighter accident. The inheritance they received was minimal, barely enough to purchase a small cargo ship and establish a shipping company. They named it Starbreaker 12, a grandiose title for what amounted to a barely functional light freighter and a handful of supply contracts. For years they scraped by, never quite making enough profit to expand, but never falling so far into debt that they lost everything. They dreamed of something bigger, some discovery or opportunity that would finally elevate them from the ranks of struggling independent operators. They talked endlessly about being the ones to discover a major new hyperspace route, something that would make their fortune and their names. But dreams required capital, and capital was precisely what they lacked. Their debts mounted. Creditors grew impatient. The Empress Teta system was wealthy, dominated by major shipping corporations with vast fleets and political connections. Two orphans with one ship stood no chance in legitimate competition. Their only option was to take risks the big companies would never consider. Gav proposed using an experimental hyperdrive configuration, one that theoretically allowed for jumps to coordinates that had never been properly mapped. It was dangerous to the point of suicidal. Hyperspace navigation required precise calculations. Jump to the wrong coordinates and you could emerge inside a star, or in the gravitational well of a black hole, or simply be lost forever in the unmapped regions between spiral arms. But it was also the only way to potentially discover new routes before the major corporations. Jory was hesitant, but ultimately agreed. They were going to lose their ship to creditors anyway if something did not change. At least this way they were taking control of their fate rather than passively accepting failure. They filed a fraudulent flight plan, claiming they were running a routine cargo delivery to the Outer Rim. In reality, they loaded Starbreaker 12 with enough supplies for an extended journey and plotted coordinates that their navigation computer immediately flagged as dangerously incomplete. Gav overrode the safety protocols, telling himself that fortune favored the bold, that this was their moment. The jump began normally enough. The familiar sensation of the hyperdrive, engaging, reality stretching and distorting as their ship transitioned into that higher dimensional space where faster-than-light travel became possible. The swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace surrounded them, and for the first few minutes everything seemed fine. Then the alarms started. Their navigation computer, struggling with the incomplete coordinate data, began throwing error messages. The ship shuddered, buffeted by gravitational anomalies that should not have existed along a properly calculated route. Jory frantically tried to abort the jump, but the hyperdrive had already committed. They were locked in, hurtling through hyperspace on a trajectory neither of them understood. When they finally dropped back into real space, both siblings knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. The stars were wrong. The constellations they had grown up navigating by were gone, replaced by patterns neither recognized. Their ship's database could not identify any nearby systems. They were completely, utterly lost. Then their sensors detected the planet, Korriban. Though they did not know its name, they could see it was inhabited. Massive structures dotted its surface. Clearly the work of an advanced civilization. Hope surged. If they could make contact with whoever lived here, perhaps get navigation data to find their way home, they might still salvage this disaster. They began broadcasting on standard Republic frequencies, identifying themselves as explorers in need of assistance. The response came within seconds. But it was not words of welcome. It was a targeting lock. Dozens of them. ships they had not even detected, suddenly appeared on sensors, dropping out of some kind of advanced stealth mode. The designs were unlike anything in Republic space, organic-looking, almost predatory. Gav tried to jump back to hyperspace, but their hyperdrive had not finished recharging. Jory activated their shields, but Starbreaker 12 was a cargo ship, not a military vessel. The shields were designed to deflect micrometeors, not weapons fire. The first tractor beam hit them like a physical blow, and suddenly they were not in control of their ship anymore. They were being pulled inexorably toward Korriban, toward whatever civilization existed on that rust-colored world, and every instinct they possessed screamed that they had made a terrible mistake. The Massassi boarding party came through their airlock with brutal efficiency. Warriors 7 feet tall, their crimson skin covered in ritual scarring, wearing armor that looked designed more for intimidation than protection. They moved with perfect coordination, weapons raised, shouting commands in a language the siblings did not recognize. Gav and Jory raised their hands in surrender, trying to communicate that they meant no harm, but the warriors showed no interest in communication. They were bound with energy restraints that burned against their skin. Their ship was impounded, and within the hour, they were being transported to the surface, to chambers carved from black ice on the frozen world of Zeost, to be brought before a council of beings whose very presence radiated a cold malevolence that made both siblings want to weep. The Sith Council convened in emergency session. For the first time in 1,000 years, beings from the Republic had entered Sith space. The question was simple but carried enormous implications. Were these scouts? Were they the vanguard of an invasion fleet? How much did the Republic know about the Sith Empire's location and strength? Ludo Kresh seized the moment. He stood before the assembled Dark Lords and painted the bleakest possible picture. These were obviously spies. The Republic had finally discovered them. Invasion was imminent. The only rational response was to execute these prisoners immediately, mobilize every ship in the Sith fleet, and prepare for total war. Everything he had warned about was coming to pass. Expansion would have to wait. Survival was all that mattered now. Many Dark Lords nodded in agreement. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Crash had stoked it expertly. The momentum was clearly toward execution and militarization. But Naga Sadow said nothing. He sat on his throne, fingers steepled, watching the proceedings with an expression of deep thought. His mind was racing, seeing connections and possibilities that others missed. These were not scouts. Their ship was commercial, barely armed. Their distress when captured had been genuine. They were lost explorers who had stumbled into Sith space by accident. And that accident was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He called for a vote delay, suggesting more interrogation was needed before making irreversible decisions. His suggestion was accepted, barely, over Chryse's objections. The prisoners were separated, Gav sent to one cell block and Jory to another, a standard interrogation technique to prevent them from coordinating stories. But Sadow had no intention of interrogating them. He had something far more elaborate in mind. Something that would simultaneously neutralize Chryse's opposition, unite the Sith Empire under his command, and position him to achieve the conquest he had always envisioned. All he needed was to create the right crisis, and he had just been handed the perfect tools to do exactly that. Naga Sadow spent 3 days in isolation after the council session, allowing no visitors to his private chambers on Kashyyyk. His most trusted advisors grew worried, wondering if the pressure of leadership was overwhelming their Dark Lord. But Sadow was not overwhelmed. He was planning. The scheme that formed in his mind was audacious to the point of madness, requiring perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and a willingness to risk everything on a single deception. But if it worked, it would give him exactly what he needed. The Sith Empire would unite behind him out of sheer necessity. Ludo Kresh would be politically neutered, and Sadow would have the authority and the justification to pursue the galactic conquest he believed was the Sith's destiny. He began by summoning his most loyal Massassi commanders, warriors who owed their positions entirely to him and whose obedience was beyond question. He explained what he needed, and though their faces showed uncertainty at the boldness of the plan, they accepted their orders without hesitation. Loyalty in Sith culture was absolute once given, and these warriors had pledged themselves to Sadow completely. Next came the preparations. Sadow possessed extensive knowledge of Sith alchemy, that dark side discipline that could reshape matter and create illusions indistinguishable from reality. He spent hours in meditation, gathering his power, preparing the techniques he would need. He also accessed the armory of captured equipment from ancient conflicts, finding armor and weapons from a dozen different species and civilizations. Much of it was archaic, but with modification, it could serve his purpose. The most critical element was studying the Darragon siblings' ship. Starbreaker 12 had been impounded and was being held in a secure hangar on Zeost. Sadow's agents accessed it secretly, downloading every byte of data from its navigation computer. What they found was beyond valuable. The ship contained detailed hyperspace routes throughout Republic space, coordinates for Coruscant itself, the Republic capital, trade routes to wealthy systems like Empress Teta, military installations, shipyards, resource-rich worlds. It was a roadmap to the entire Republic, delivered into Sadow's hands by pure chance, or perhaps not chance. Perhaps the Force itself had guided those explorers here for this exact purpose. Sadow allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Everything was aligning perfectly. On the fourth night after the council session, Sadow put his plan into motion. He positioned his loyal Massassi throughout Zeost's capital city, each group carefully placed near strategic targets. They wore modified armor that from a distance and in dim light could pass for Republic military equipment. The armor would not withstand close inspection, but close inspection was not part of the plan. Then Sadow unleashed his greatest illusion, using techniques perfected over decades of study, channeling power through Sith artifacts placed strategically around the city. He projected images into the night sky above Zeost. Republic warships, dozens of them, appearing to drop out of hyperspace in attack formation. The illusions were perfect. They showed up on sensors. They appeared to launch fighter craft. They even simulated weapons fire, beams of light streaking down toward the planet's surface. The effect was instantaneous and exactly what Sadow had calculated. Alarms screamed across Zeost. Sith defenders rushed to battle stations, convinced the Republic invasion Kresh had predicted was actually happening. The planetary defense fleet scrambled, launching to engage what appeared to be a massive enemy armada. In the chaos, Sadow's disguised Massassi struck. They attacked Sith military installations, but only superficially, causing visible damage without truly crippling anything important. They fired on government buildings, the blasts carefully controlled to look devastating, while actually doing minimal structural harm. Most critically, they attacked the prison complex, where the Darragon siblings were being held. The prison guards, already panicked by what appeared to be a full-scale Republic assault, found themselves under direct attack by soldiers wearing Republic-style armor. The defenders fought back, but they were outnumbered and disoriented. Within minutes, the prison's security systems were offline, the cells unlocked. Gav and Jory, terrified and confused, found their cell doors suddenly opening. They heard weapons fire, screams, the sounds of battle echoing through the corridors. Then a figure appeared, lightsaber ignited, cutting through the remaining guards. Naga Sadow, playing the role of rescuer with perfect conviction. He grabbed both siblings, his urgency genuine even if its cause was manufactured. He told them the Republic had come for them, that a rescue operation was underway, that they needed to move immediately before Sith reinforcements arrived. The twins, desperate to believe they might survive this nightmare, followed without question. Sadow led them through carefully planned escape routes, areas where his Massassi had already eliminated any witnesses. They emerged into the chaos of the city under apparent attack, and Sadow directed them toward his personal transport. He told them he was taking them somewhere safe, away from the battle where they could hide until the fighting ended. The transport lifted off, leaving Seduced behind, but instead of heading into the battle above, where the illusion still raged, Sadow took them to Kashyyyk. His fortress moon, he explained, was neutral territory. The Republic would not attack there. They would be safe under his protection. Gav and Jory, exhausted and traumatized, accepted this explanation. They saw Sadow as their savior, the one Dark Lord who had shown them mercy when others wanted them executed. They had no way of knowing that the entire attack had been theater, that the Republic ships above Seduced were phantoms, that their rescuer was the architect of their imprisonment in the first place. Back on Seduced, the morning revealed the scope of the supposed attack. Buildings damaged, military installations struck, the prison breached, and prisoners escaped. And most importantly, every sensor log confirmed that Republic warships had been in orbit. The evidence was overwhelming and completely fabricated. The Sith Council convened in emergency session once again. This time, the mood was entirely different. Ludocracy stood before them, vindicated. Everything he had warned about had come to pass. The Republic knew about them. The Republic had launched a military strike on Seduced itself. The Republic had rescued their spies. War was no longer a possibility to debate. It was a reality they had to confront. Krysh demanded immediate mobilization. Every ship, every warrior, every resource the Sith possessed needed to be prepared for the invasion that would surely follow. He also demanded that Naga Sadow be investigated. The timing was too convenient. The prisoners escaping during the confusion was suspicious. Perhaps Sadow himself had orchestrated this somehow. But Krysh's accusations fell flat. The evidence of the attack was incontrovertible. Dozens of Dark Lords and thousands of soldiers had witnessed the Republic ships. The sensor logs were clear, and Sadow himself had been seen fighting to defend Seduced, had even rescued prisoners to prevent them from being used as intelligence assets by the Republic forces. If anything, his quick thinking during the crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of decisive leadership the Empire needed. The vote was overwhelming. Naga Sadow was granted emergency powers to mobilize the Sith military. All Dark Lords were commanded to contribute their ships and warriors to a unified fleet under Sadow's command. Internal disputes were tabled for the duration of the crisis. The Empire would stand together against the Republic threat, or it would fall divided. Sadow accepted the authority with appropriate gravity, giving speeches about unity and survival, about the Sith people standing together against external enemies. Privately, he savored his complete victory. In one perfectly executed operation, he had neutralized all opposition, secured absolute military authority, and positioned himself to pursue the very expansion that Krysh and his faction had opposed. But the deception went deeper still. On Kashyyyk, Sadow began the process of corrupting Gav Daragon. It started subtly, with kindness and understanding. Sadow spent time with the young explorer, listening to his frustrations, his dreams of importance and success. He learned that Gav had spent his entire life feeling inadequate, always scraping by, never achieving the recognition he craved. Sadow offered him something revolutionary: power. Not political power or wealth, but something far more fundamental. He showed Gav the Force, just small demonstrations at first, moving objects with thought, sensing emotions, minor telekinetic displays. But for Gav, who had never imagined such abilities existed, it was transformative. Sadow explained that the Force was not the exclusive domain of the Jedi, that the Republic's Force users were hypocrites who hoarded knowledge and power while preaching humility. The Sith understood the Force's true nature, that it responded to passion and will, that it rewarded those bold enough to seize what they wanted. And Gav, desperate and vulnerable, began to listen. Sadow framed everything in terms that appealed to the young man's insecurities. The Republic had failed him, left him struggling while the wealthy thrived. The Jedi would never have helped him, would have seen his ambition as a character flaw rather than strength. But the Sith valued ambition. They understood that wanting more from life was not greed but the natural desire to fulfill one's potential. Over days and then weeks, the corruption deepened. Sadow taught Gav meditation techniques that opened him to the dark side. He gave him a Sith amulet, a minor artifact that enhanced Force sensitivity, but also created dependency. He showed him visions of a united galaxy, where Gav could be someone important, someone powerful, someone who mattered. Jory watched her brother's transformation with growing horror. She saw him changing, becoming someone she did not recognize. She tried to reach him, to remind him of who they were and where they came from. But Gav brushed off her concerns. He told her she did not understand, that Sadow was offering them an opportunity to be part of something greater than themselves. The wedge between the siblings grew daily. Sadow encouraged it, keeping them separated as much as possible, giving Gav reasons to see his sister as holding him back. He framed Jory's resistance as fear, as small-minded thinking that would keep Gav trapped in mediocrity forever. Finally, Sadow revealed his true purpose. He needed a guide, someone who knew Republic space intimately, who could navigate the hyperspace routes and identify key targets. He told Gav this was not about conquest but unification. The Republic and the Sith were two halves of a divided galaxy. By bringing them together, even if it required initial conflict, they would create something stronger than either civilization alone. Gav, fully corrupted now, saw the logic. He convinced himself that he would be a hero, the bridge between two peoples, the one whose knowledge enabled peace through strength. He agreed to help Sadow, to provide navigation data, to guide the Sith fleet into Republic space. He never asked why such unification required secrecy. He never questioned why his sister was essentially a prisoner, confined to quarters and kept away from him. He never examined too closely the contradiction between Sadow's words of unity and the very real fleet of warships being assembled. The dark side had claimed another victim, not through torture or force, but through the oldest technique in existence. It offered him exactly what he wanted to hear, wrapped his corruption in justifications that let him feel noble, and by the time he realized the truth, it would be far too late. Naga Sadow stood in his fortress's observation room, watching his fleet assemble in orbit around Kashyyyk. Hundreds of ships, the largest armada the Sith had fielded in centuries. He had his authority. He had his justification. He had his guide to Republic space. Everything was in position for the conquest he had envisioned from the moment Marka Ragnus's ghost had declared him Dark Lord. The great hyperspace war was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. Ludo Kresh was not a fool. He had survived decades of Sith politics through careful observation and pattern recognition. The attack on Zayast had been too convenient, too perfectly timed to benefit Sadow's ambitions. Every instinct Kresh possessed screamed that he had been manipulated, but instinct was not proof. The sensor logs were genuine. Thousands of witnesses had seen the Republic ships. The physical damage to installations was real, yet something about the entire situation felt orchestrated. He began his own investigation quietly, speaking with trusted allies, reviewing the attack patterns, analyzing exactly what had been damaged and what had been left untouched. The more he examined the evidence, the more suspicious he became. The Republic assault had caused maximum visible chaos while inflicting minimal actual strategic damage, almost as if someone had wanted the appearance of an attack without the substance. But before Kresh could gather enough evidence to present to the Council, Sadow made his next move, using the emergency powers granted to him. The Dark Lord issued a general mobilization order. Every Sith world was commanded to contribute ships and warriors to a unified defense fleet. Sadow positioned this as necessary preparation for the Republic counter-invasion that everyone expected. Crash saw through the rhetoric immediately. This was not defensive positioning. Sadow was assembling an invasion force. The fleet composition made that clear to anyone with military experience. Too many troop carriers, too few defensive platforms. The ships were being staged not around Sith worlds, but at forward positions near the edge of known space. Every tactical choice pointed toward offensive operations, not defense. He brought his concerns to the Council, but Sadow had already secured majority support. The emergency had shifted political momentum entirely. Dark Lords who had been neutral or even sympathetic to Kresh's cautious approach now saw unity as survival. Questioning Sadow's leadership during a crisis was portrayed as borderline treasonous. Kresh found himself increasingly isolated, his warnings dismissed as political sniping. The breaking point came when Kresh learned that Sadow had the Republic explorers hidden on Kashyyyk. One of them, the male, was being seen regularly in Sadow's company, apparently being trained in Sith techniques. This was beyond suspicious. It was confirmation that something deeply wrong was happening. No true Sith would teach their secrets to a Republic citizen unless some larger scheme was in play. Kresh made one final attempt at political resolution. He called for a formal vote of no confidence, demanding that Sadow be stripped of his emergency powers and investigated for possible treason. The session was heated, with accusations flying from both sides. Sadow defended his actions as necessary innovation, arguing that the old ways had left the Sith unprepared for modern threats. Kresh countered that abandoning tradition was abandoning the wisdom that had kept them safe for millennia. The vote failed. Sadow retained his authority, bolstered by the fear he had so carefully cultivated. But the political defeat was not what shattered the fragile peace. It was what Sadow said after the vote concluded. He announced that within weeks, the Sith fleet would launch a preemptive strike against the Republic, not a defensive measure, but an offensive war. He justified it with strategic logic about striking before the enemy could fully mobilize, about seizing the initiative, about expanding Sith territory to create buffer zones. But the implications were unmistakable. This was the conquest Sadow had always wanted, wrapped in the justification of the crisis he himself had manufactured. Kresh left the council chamber, knowing that words had failed, political maneuvering had failed. The only option remaining was the one he had hoped to avoid. If Sadow would not be stopped through legitimate means, then illegitimate means would have to suffice. The Sith Empire was about to tear itself apart, and Kresh was prepared to be the one who started the tearing, if it meant preventing the greater catastrophe he saw approaching. He returned to Seduced and issued a call to arms to every Dark Lord who shared his vision. Enough answered that call to make him dangerous. Perhaps a third of the Sith military remained loyal to traditional isolationism, unwilling to follow Sadow into what they saw as suicidal expansion. They began gathering their forces, preparing for the confrontation everyone now understood was inevitable. While the Sith Empire fractured along political lines, Jory Durrigan was planning her own rebellion. She had been confined to quarters in Sadow's fortress for weeks, essentially a prisoner despite the comfortable surroundings. Guards stood outside her door at all times, Massassi warriors who did not speak Basic and showed no interest in her attempts at communication. She had watched her brother transform into someone unrecognizable. The few times Sadow had allowed them contact, Gav spoke in grand terms about destiny and purpose, about power and significance. He looked at her with something approaching pity, as if she was too small-minded to understand the opportunities being offered. It broke her heart even as it strengthened her resolve. Jory understood what Gav apparently could not. They were being used. Sadow had no intention of uniting the galaxy peacefully. He was planning an invasion, and her brother was going to be the tool that made it possible. Every instinct she possessed screamed that she had to escape, had to warn the Republic, had to try to stop what was coming, even if the odds were impossible. Her opportunity came from an unexpected source. Among the enslaved species serving in Sadow's fortress was a Massassi who had retained more intelligence than most of his altered brethren. His name was unpronounceable in Basic, but he understood far more than he let his masters know. He had watched the siblings, had seen Jory's resistance and Gav's corruption, and had made a choice. He approached her one evening when the guard rotation changed, a brief window when her door was momentarily unobserved. He could not speak Basic well, but he made his intentions clear through gesture. He would help her escape. His motivation was simple. If the Sith went to war with the Republic and lost, there was a chance the enslaved species might be freed. It was a desperate hope, but it was more than he had under current circumstances. The plan was crude but workable. During the next shift change, he would create a distraction in another part of the fortress. The guards would respond, leaving her corridor temporarily clear. She would have perhaps 3 minutes to reach the hangar where her ship was being held. After that, she was on her own. Jory spent the intervening hours memorizing every corridor and turn she had observed during her brief escorted walks through the fortress. She had no weapons, no tools, nothing but her knowledge of her own ship and a desperate need to succeed. The odds were terrible, but doing nothing was not an option she could live with. The distraction came at midnight, time to coincide with the guard change. An explosion in the fortress's lower levels, significant enough to trigger alarms but controlled enough not to cause real structural damage. Alarms blared, and Jory heard the heavy footfalls of Massassi warriors running past her door. She counted to 30, giving them time to move away, then tried the door. It was unlocked. Her nameless ally had kept his promise. She slipped into the corridor, her heart hammering so hard she feared it would give her away. The fortress's architecture was deliberately maze-like, designed to confuse intruders, but she had studied it carefully. Left at the first junction, straight through the next two, then down the service stairs to the hangar level. She encountered one Massassi guard who had not responded to the alarm. He looked at her with confusion, clearly uncertain why a prisoner was wandering free. Jory did not give him time to decide what to do. She ran, and her sudden flight triggered his pursuit instinct. He charged after her, but Massassi were bred for strength, not speed. She was smaller, faster, and motivated by pure survival instinct. The hangar was ahead. She could see Starbreaker 12 through the open doors, her ship sitting exactly where it had been impounded. She sprinted the final distance, hearing the Massassi guard bellowing behind her, probably calling for reinforcements. The ship's boarding ramp was down. She hit it at full speed, muscle memory guiding her to the cockpit. The controls responded immediately. Thank whatever gods existed that Sadow had kept the ship maintained rather than stripping it for parts. The engines came online, and she lifted off without bothering to close the boarding ramp. Weapons fire erupted around her. The Massassi guards were firing, and now other ships in the hangar were powering up to pursue. Jory pushed the throttle to maximum, blasting through the hangar's atmospheric shield and out into open space. Karshian's surface fell away beneath her, and ahead lay the infinite black between stars. She plotted a hyperspace jump with shaking hands, inputting coordinates for Empress Teta, for home, for the only place she could think to go. Pursuit ships were launching now, Sith interceptors far faster than her cargo vessel, but she had a head start, and she only needed seconds. The hyperdrive engaged. The stars stretched into lines, and Karshian vanished behind her. She had escaped. Against impossible odds, she had actually escaped. But the victory felt hollow. She was heading home to warn the Republic of an invasion, and the navigation data that would guide that invasion was still in Sith hands. Worse, her brother was still there, still corrupted, still believing Sadow's lies. Back on Carshian, Naga Sadow stood in the empty hangar, looking at the space where Starbreaker 12 had been. His face showed rage, but it was calculated rage, not genuine surprise. He had known Jory was a flight risk. He had deliberately kept security around her looser than it appeared, hoping she would make exactly this attempt. Because her escape served his purposes perfectly. She would run to the Republic with tales of a Sith invasion fleet. The Republic's Senate, complacent and unused to real threats, would likely dismiss her warnings as the ravings of a debtor trying to avoid consequences. But some would listen. Some would begin preparing defenses, and when Sadow's fleet arrived, the fact that the Republic had been warned and still fallen would only make the victory more complete. More immediately, Jory's escape gave Sadow justification for his next move. He sent word to Ludo Kresh that the Republic spy had escaped, that she was undoubtedly carrying intelligence back to her government, that the invasion timeline had just accelerated. Any delay now was not caution, but suicide. It was the final provocation Kresh needed. He issued his own proclamation, declaring Sadow a traitor to the Sith people and calling for his immediate removal from power. Those Dark Lords loyal to tradition were commanded to rally to Seduced. The Sith Empire was no longer unified, even in pretense. It was two factions preparing for war, with Sadow holding the majority of military forces and Kresh holding the moral high ground among traditionalists. The first battle was inevitable. Kresh could not allow Sadow to launch his Republic invasion without opposition. If the Sith revealed themselves to the Republic and the campaign failed, it would bring retribution down on every Sith world. He had to stop Sadow before the fleet could launch, which meant attacking Carshian directly. His armada gathered at Seduced, perhaps 200 ships, a formidable force under any other circumstances. But Sadow commanded twice that number. The mathematics of the coming battle were brutally simple. Kresh could not win through superior force. His only hope was a decapitation strike, killing Sadow personally and throwing the loyalist forces into disarray. The fleet jumped to Carshian, emerging from hyperspace in attack formation. Sadow's forces were waiting. He had known Kresh would come, had positioned his defenses accordingly. The space around Carshian became a battlefield. Sith killing Sith, the civil war that both sides had tried to avoid, now unleashed in all its horror. Kresh commanded from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that had seen 3 centuries of service. He drove straight for Sadow's position, ignoring losses, focused entirely on his target. If he could just reach Sadow, if he could kill the Pretender, the loyalist forces might fracture. But Naga Sadow had not survived decades of Sith politics without learning to anticipate his enemies. As Kresh's flagship closed in, pushing through the defensive screen, Sadow implemented the final phase of his deception. He allowed his own flagship to be surrounded, let Kresh believe he had the advantage. Then the ship exploded. A spectacular detonation that vaporized the entire vessel and everything around it. Kresh's sensors registered Sadow's death, confirmed by the presence of a body in the wreckage, identifiable through genetic markers. Ludo Kresh stood on his bridge watching the debris field and allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Pretender was dead. The threat to the Sith Empire had been eliminated. Now came the harder work of rebuilding unity, of returning to the old ways, of ensuring the Sith remained hidden and safe. He ordered his fleet to stand down, broadcasting to all Sith forces that the crisis was over. Naga Sadow was dead. The emergency was concluded. All ships should return to their home worlds and await new leadership to be determined by the Council in accordance with tradition. Most of the ships complied. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun, both sides exhausted and mourning losses they had never wanted to inflict. Kresh's fleet jumped back to Seduced, and Sadow's loyalists dispersed to their various stations, shocked by their leader's apparent death. But in a hidden facility on the far side of Kashyyyin's primary moon, Naga Sadow watched the battle's conclusion with cold satisfaction. The body Kresh had identified was a double, a loyal servant who had undergone surgical and alchemical alteration to become indistinguishable from Sadow himself. The servant had known his fate and accepted it willingly, believing he was dying for the glory of the Sith Empire. Sadow's actual fleet, the true invasion force he had been assembling, was not at Kashyyyin at all. It was hidden in a nebula 3 systems away, comprising his most loyal forces and his most capable commanders. While Kresh celebrated victory on Zeost, Sadow was already moving his real armada into position for the invasion that neither Kresh nor the Republic would see coming. The civil war was over, decided by deception rather than combat. Sadow had sacrificed some of his forces to sell the illusion, but he had gained something far more valuable. Kresh now believed him dead, would be focused on consolidating political control, would have his attention pointed entirely inward towards Sith space. He would never see the knife coming until it was already buried in his back, and by then, the great hyperspace war would have already begun. The Republic would be burning, and there would be no turning back for anyone. Naga Sadow stood alone in the hidden command center, looking at the tactical display showing his secret fleet. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of Massassi warriors, all waiting for his command. And standing beside him, watching the same display with eager eyes, was Gav Daragon, fully corrupted now, ready to guide the Sith to the Republic's heart. The Dark Lord smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had foreseen. The galaxy was about to learn that the Sith were not extinct, not myths, not legends from ancient history. They were real, they were powerful, and they were coming. Jori Daragon emerged from hyperspace near Coruscant 3 days after her escape from Kashyyyin. Her ship was damaged from the hasty departure, hull scoring visible where Massassi weapons had grazed her shields. She was exhausted, having barely slept during the journey, sustained only by Kaffa rations and the desperate need to deliver her warning. Coruscant filled her view screen, that city-covered world at the heart of the Republic. Thousands of ships moved in carefully controlled traffic patterns around the planet, a dance of commerce and bureaucracy that had continued uninterrupted for centuries. Looking at that peaceful scene, Jori felt the weight of what she knew pressing down on her. All of this was about to change, and most of these people had no idea. She broadcast on emergency Republic frequencies, identifying herself and requesting immediate contact with the Senate or military command. The response was not what she hoped for. Instead of being rushed to leadership, she found herself directed to land at a security facility and await official processing. The controller's tone suggested this was routine procedure for unauthorized arrivals, nothing urgent. The landing facility was bureaucratic and impersonal. Security officers reviewed her ship's records, ran background checks, and discovered exactly what she had fled. Outstanding debts across multiple systems, legal judgments against her business, violations of hyperspace traffic regulations. To them, she looked like exactly what the records suggested, a failed cargo operator who had jumped into uncharted space trying to avoid creditors and was now trying to avoid consequences. When she finally got the chance to tell her story, the response was polite skepticism. A Sith empire, in the Outer Rim, an advanced civilization that the Republic had somehow never detected despite centuries of expansion. And this empire was planning to invade. The story sounded like exactly the kind of desperate fabrication someone in her legal situation might invent. She tried to explain about the technology she had seen, the ships, the Force using Dark Lords, the ancient culture that clearly predated anything in Republic records. But the officials listening had heard countless wild stories from people trying to avoid legal consequences. They nodded, took notes, and told her she would need to remain in custody while her claims were investigated and her legal situation was resolved. Jori found herself in a Republic detention facility, comfortable but secure, her warnings filed away as interesting but unverified claims from an unreliable source. She demanded to speak with Jedi, with military commanders, with anyone who might take the threat seriously. Some promises were made, but days passed without meaningful action. There was one exception, a junior officer named Rodrek, assigned to the Republic's Naval Reconnaissance Division. He had been present during one of Jory's interrogations, and something about her story bothered him. Not because he necessarily believed it, but because her ship's navigation logs showed she had indeed traveled to coordinates that corresponded to no known Republic systems. The data was incomplete and partially corrupted, but it was real. Rodrek began making quiet inquiries. He checked historical records for any mention of a Sith civilization. What he found was scattered and ancient, references in texts thousands of years old to a species called the Sith, who had once battled with early Jedi. But those accounts placed the Sith as extinct, their civilization destroyed in conflicts predating the Republic itself. Still, the discrepancy gnawed at him. If Jory had fabricated her story, why invent something so closely aligned with obscure historical references she likely had never heard of? And where exactly had she gone when she disappeared from Republic space? He pulled a few favors and got approval to quietly begin repositioning some reconnaissance assets toward the coordinates Jory had provided. Not a military response, just surveillance, watching for any unusual activity. His superiors approved the request mostly because it was low cost and might confirm that nothing was there, which would close the investigation cleanly. Rodrek never got the chance to see what his senses would have detected, because 8 days after Jory's arrival on Coruscant, the Sith fleet emerged from hyperspace across 7 different Republic systems simultaneously. The attack on Empress Terra came first, probably because it was Jory's home, and Sadow appreciated the poetic justice. The system consisted of 7 inhabited worlds, wealthy and peaceful, defended only by local security forces designed to handle pirates, not military invasions. When the Sith fleet materialized in orbit around Sinagar, the capital world, there was no time to even sound a coherent alarm before the bombardment began. Sith warships were unlike anything in Republic design. Organic-looking, almost alive in their architecture, they moved with a fluid grace that belied their size, and they carried weapons that Republic senses struggled to categorize, some kind of hybrid technology that combined conventional firepower with focused dark side energy. The planetary shields held for approximately 7 minutes. Then they collapsed under sustained barrage, and Massassi drop ships began their descent. The warriors that emerged were nightmare-given form, 7 feet of muscle and weaponry, showing no mercy to anyone who resisted. The fighting in Sinagar's streets was brutal and one-sided. Simultaneously, Koros Major, another key world in the system, came under siege, and Kirik and Ronica. The Sith had committed enough forces to assault multiple planets at once, demonstrating a military capacity that shocked every tactical analyst who later reviewed the battle data. At almost the same moment, Coruscant detected massive fleet signatures emerging near its outer defense perimeter. Sadow had not sent his full force against the capital. He was not that reckless, but he had sent enough to make a statement. Perhaps 50 warships, supported by fighters and smaller craft, closing on the most heavily defended world in the Republic. The response was chaos. Coruscant had substantial defenses, but they were designed around the assumption of some warning time. Fleets that could respond were spread across the galaxy on patrol. The forces immediately available were enough to engage the Sith attackers, but not enough to guarantee victory against an unknown enemy using unfamiliar tactics. Alarms screamed across the planet. Military installations went to full combat status. Civilian evacuation protocols activated in districts most vulnerable to orbital strikes, and in the Senate chamber, politicians who had been debating tax policy 20 minutes earlier suddenly found themselves facing existential questions about Republic survival. The Jedi Temple responded faster than the bureaucratic apparatus. Masters who had spent decades studying ancient Force techniques felt disturbances in the Force that spoke of massive dark side presence. They mobilized immediately, not waiting for Senate approval, grabbing whatever ships were available and rushing to join the defense. In the detention facility where she was being held, Jory Darrigan heard the alarms and knew exactly what they meant. She screamed at her guards, demanding to be released, insisting that she had tried to warn them. Some of the guards looked at her with new understanding, but regulations required them to wait for official authorization before releasing prisoners. By the time that authorization came, hours had passed and the battle around Coruscant was fully engaged. The fighting in orbit was unlike anything most Republic crews had experienced. The Sith ships moved in coordinated patterns that suggested some kind of unified command system, though Republic sensors could not detect any communication between vessels. They later learned about battle meditation, about how Sadow himself was coordinating the fleet through the Force from his flagship light years away. More troubling were the illusions. Republic sensors would register dozens of Sith ships in one location, concentrate fire, and discover they had been shooting at phantoms. The real ships would attack from a different vector entirely. It was Sith alchemy, on a scale no one had imagined possible, using the Force to deceive not just organic perception but mechanical senses as well. The Coruscant Defense Fleet fought with courage and skill, but they were adapting to enemy tactics in real time against an opponent who had planned this assault for months. Losses mounted. Ships that had patrolled peacefully for decades found themselves crippled and burning, their crews dying without ever fully understanding what they were fighting. But Coruscant held. The defenses were too strong, too numerous, for even Sadow's forces to overwhelm. After 6 hours of intense combat, the Sith fleet withdrew, jumping back to hyperspace, having inflicted significant damage, but failed to take the capital. It was a strategic victory for the Republic, but it felt like a defeat. The casualty numbers were horrific, and the psychological impact of suddenly discovering a hostile empire with near-peer military capabilities was devastating. Reports flooded in from across Republic space. Empress Teta, under full siege. Kirik had fallen within hours. Attacks reported on Karos, on Primus Gullus, on outposts along the Outer Rim. The scope of the invasion was staggering. This was not a raid. This was a coordinated military campaign designed to conquer Republic territory. The Senate convened in emergency session. The debate was bitter and frightened. Some argued for immediate counterattack. Others insisted on defensive consolidation, protecting what they held rather than extending further. A few voices called for attempting diplomatic contact, trying to understand what this Sith empire wanted, whether terms could be reached. Jory Darrigan stood before the Senate, no longer a prisoner but an intelligence asset. She told them everything she had seen, everything she knew about Sith capabilities and leadership. She explained about the dark side, about Force users who embraced power without the Jedi's ethical constraints. She described Naga Sadow, the Dark Lord whose ambition had launched this war. And she told them about her brother, about Gava, corrupted by Sadow, now serving as guide and navigator for the Sith fleet. The senators listened with grim faces, understanding that this war had a very personal dimension for the young woman standing before them. Some showed sympathy. Others saw only a potential intelligence opportunity, wondering if family connections could be exploited. A Republic strategy emerged slowly. Fleet Admiral Eula would take command of the counteroffensive. All available military resources would be consolidated under his authority. The Jedi Order would deploy its knights to provide Force support, countering Sith abilities with light side techniques. And Jory Darrigan would join the fleet as an advisor, using her knowledge of Sith space and tactics to guide Republic operations. The goal was straightforward but incredibly difficult. Track the Sith fleet back to their home space, destroy their ability to make war, force a surrender or armistice that would end the threat. Simple in concept, nightmarish in execution. Mobilization began immediately. Ships were recalled from every sector. Defense fleets abandoned their posts to join the main force. It was the largest military mobilization in Republic history, hundreds of capital ships and thousands of smaller craft, all converging on designated rally points. Meanwhile, across 7 different star systems, civilians huddled in shelters while Massassi warriors patrolled their streets. Resistance forces organized in the shadows, using whatever weapons they could scavenge. Some worlds negotiated surrenders, hoping mercy might spare their populations. Others fought with desperate courage, knowing they could not win but refusing to submit. The Great Hyperspace War had begun, and it would reshape the galaxy in ways no one could yet imagine. Thousands would die in the coming weeks. Ancient civilizations would be destroyed, and at the center of it all, 2 Force-using orders, Jedi and Sith, would collide in a conflict that would echo across millennia. On his flagship deep in Sith-controlled space, Naga Sadow meditated in his command sphere. He could feel the battles raging across multiple systems, could sense each death through the Force, each moment of fear and courage. The war was proceeding faster than even he had anticipated. The Republic was stronger than intelligence had suggested, their response more coordinated. But he had committed fully now. There could be no turning back, no negotiated peace. He would conquer the Republic, or die trying, and beside him, still believing they were bringing unity rather than destruction, stood Gav Daragon, the young man whose knowledge had made this entire war possible. The galaxy burned, and the worst was yet to come. 3 weeks into the war, the initial shock had crystallized into grim determination across Republic space. The military mobilization continued at unprecedented scale, but now there was structure to it, strategy replacing panic. Fleet Admiral Euler had established his command center on a massive Republic dreadnought called Starbreaker Valor, perhaps a deliberate echo of the ship that had accidentally started this entire conflict. The tactical situation remained desperate, but no longer hopeless. The Sith had captured or destroyed several Outer Rim systems, but their advance had stalled against concentrated Republic resistance. Empress Teta remained under siege, its population suffering but not broken. Koros Major had become the center of the most intense fighting, with control of the planet changing hands twice as Republic forces launched counterattacks. Jori Daragon had proven invaluable to the war effort. Her descriptions of Sith tactics and technology had allowed Republic engineers to develop countermeasures. She had warned about battle meditation, and Jedi Masters now flew with every major fleet element, using their own Force abilities to provide coordination and disrupt Sith illusions. She had described Massassi warrior tactics, and Republic ground forces had adapted their defensive strategies accordingly. But intelligence remained fragmentary. The Republic still did not know where the Sith homeworlds were located. Every attempt to track Sith ships back through hyperspace had failed, the enemy commanders deliberately taking circuitous routes to mask their origins. Without knowing where to strike, the Republic was limited to defensive operations, reacting to Sith aggression rather than taking the initiative. In the Senate chambers, the debate had shifted from whether to fight to how to win. The Doves, those who had initially called for negotiation, had been silenced by Sith brutality against civilian populations. Reports from occupied worlds told of massacres, enslavements, entire cities reduced to rubble when they resisted. Whatever the Sith were, they were not interested in peaceful coexistence. The Hawks dominated now, led by Senator Tavash of the Inner Rim, who gave impassioned speeches about existential threats and the necessity of total victory. Resources that had been dedicated to civil projects were redirected to military production. Shipyards worked around the clock building new vessels. Conscription began in some sectors, though it remained voluntary in the core worlds. The Jedi Order struggled with its role in the conflict. For generations they had been peacekeepers and diplomats, using their connection to the Force for knowledge and wisdom rather than warfare. Now they found themselves as military assets, their abilities weaponized in ways that made some masters deeply uncomfortable. Master Odin one of the Order's most respected historians, spent hours studying ancient texts about the Sith. What he discovered was troubling. The Sith were not just another hostile species or rogue Force users. They represented a fundamental philosophical opposition to everything the Jedi believed. Where the Jedi sought harmony with the Force, the Sith sought dominance over it. Where the Jedi embraced selflessness, the Sith glorified selfish ambition. This was not just a political conflict that could be resolved through negotiation. It was a clash between incompatible visions of how the Force should be understood and used. One side or the other would have to prevail. There was no middle ground between their philosophies. Noir shared his findings with the Jedi Council, and the decision was made. The Order would commit fully to the war effort, not with joy or eagerness, but with the sober understanding that sometimes violence was necessary to prevent greater violence. They would fight to defend the innocent and stop an ideology that glorified cruelty and domination. Across Republic space, young people were stepping forward to volunteer for military service. The Sith invasion had unified the Republic in ways nothing had for generations. Worlds that had squabbled over trade disputes and political representation now stood together against a common enemy. It was a moment of genuine shared purpose, forged in the fires of existential threat. Far from these debates and mobilizations, aboard Naga Sadow's flagship in orbit around the besieged world of Koros Major, Gav Daragon was experiencing a transformation of a different kind. The certainty that had carried him through the early stages of the war was cracking, worn away by the reality of what his choices had enabled. Sadow had positioned him as an observer rather than a combatant. Gav's value was his knowledge, not his still-developing Force abilities. He spent his days in the command center, watching holographic displays that showed fleet movements and battle outcomes. Each icon represented ships, and each ship represented hundreds or thousands of lives. The numbers were abstract until they were not. Until he watched live feeds from Massassi helmet cameras as they stormed residential districts on Koros Major. Until he saw civilians, families not unlike what his own had been, trying to flee as warriors cut them down without hesitation. Until he heard the screams that carried over communication channels, the sounds of a city dying. Sadow noticed his discomfort, but misinterpreted it as squeamishness rather than moral awakening. The Dark Lord reassured Gav that such casualties were temporary necessities, that once the Republic surrendered, peace would be established and the killing would end. Unity required sacrifice. The galaxy would thank them eventually, once they understood the order and purpose that Sith rule would bring. But the explanations were wearing thin. Gav had begun to understand that this was not unification but conquest. The Sith were not bringing order but imposing their will through overwhelming violence. The people resisting were not ignorant fools who needed to be educated but free beings defending their homes against invasion. His memories of Jory haunted him. He had dismissed her warnings, had seen her caution as weakness rather than wisdom. Now he wondered if she had been right all along. If the opportunity Sadow had offered was poison wrapped in honey, appealing to Gav's vanity and insecurity, but ultimately destroying everything he should have valued. Sleep became difficult. When he meditated as Sadow had taught him, instead of feeling connection to the dark side, he felt a growing hollowness. The power was real. He could move objects with his mind, now could sense emotions in others, could even project minor illusions. But wielding that power no longer felt like fulfillment. It felt like corruption, like something foreign eating away at who he had been. He began avoiding Sadow when possible, making excuses about needing rest or wanting to study navigation data. The Dark Lord allowed this distance, believing Gav simply needed time to adjust to the realities of warfare. Sadow had seen many young Sith struggle with their first real taste of violence before embracing it fully. He assumed Gav would follow the same pattern. What Sadow did not sense, blinded by his own certainty, was that Gav had started listening to Republic communications. The command center received all manner of transmissions, most of them encrypted, but some broadcast openly. Pleas for help from besieged worlds, casualty reports, and occasionally propaganda broadcasts meant to demoralize Sith forces. One of those broadcasts featured Jory. She spoke directly to Sith soldiers, trying to reach anyone who might question what they were doing. But her real message was aimed at one person. She spoke about their childhood, about promises they had made to each other, about the dreams they had shared. She did not beg or condemn. She simply reminded him of who they had been before any of this started. Gav listened to that broadcast 3 times before deleting it from the system logs. Each time he felt something inside him breaking and reforming. The dark side had promised him significance, importance, power, but Jory was offering him something else. Redemption, a way back from the path he had chosen, if he had the courage to take it. The internal war raged as fiercely as the external one. Part of him, the part Sadow had cultivated, argued that turning back now would make everything meaningless. Thousands had already died because of intelligence he provided. If he betrayed the Sith now, those deaths would be for nothing. Better to see it through, to achieve the victory that would at least justify the cost. But another part of him, quieter but growing stronger, understood the fallacy in that thinking. More deaths would not justify the ones that had already occurred. They would only compound the tragedy. Every day he remained loyal to Sadow was another day the war continued, another day more innocents died. The crisis point came during the battle for Koros Major's capital city. Republic forces had launched a desperate counterattack, and the fighting devolved into street-to-street urban warfare. Gav watched through multiple camera feeds as Massassi and Republic soldiers killed each other amid burning buildings and civilian corpses. One feed showed a Republic soldier, badly wounded, crawling toward a makeshift medical station. A Massassi warrior approached, weapon raised for the killing blow. Then a civilian, an elderly woman who had been hiding in the rubble, threw herself between them. She was shouting something the audio could not quite capture, but her meaning was clear. She was begging for mercy, trying to protect a wounded enemy soldier. The Massassi killed them both. Efficiently, without hesitation, without any sign that he perceived them as anything more than obstacles to be eliminated. Gav turned away from the display, bile rising in his throat. Sadow stood nearby, watching the same feeds with calm satisfaction, noting tactical developments and issuing occasional orders. He seemed completely unmoved by the individual tragedies playing out on the screens. That was the moment Gav fully understood. This was not a path to unity or order or anything noble. This was genocide with a philosophical justification attached, and he had enabled it. His navigation data, his guidance through Republic space, had made this war possible. Every death on those screens was partially his responsibility. The realization was crushing. He could not undo what he had done, could not bring back the dead or restore the destroyed cities, but he could stop making it worse. He could find some way to end this, even if the price was his own life. Meanwhile, back in Sith space, Ludo Kresh had discovered the truth. His intelligence network, still functional despite his political defeat, had finally pieced together what Sadow had done. The attack on Seduced had been staged. The Republic explorers had been deliberately manipulated. The entire crisis that justified Sadow's emergency powers had been manufactured. And Sadow was not dead. Reports from Kresh spies indicated the Dark Lord was very much alive, commanding the invasion fleet from a massive flagship. The death at Krychian had been an elaborate deception using a body double. Kresh stood in his fortress on Seduced, looking at the evidence his agents had compiled, and felt a cold fury unlike anything he had experienced before. Sadow had not just defeated him politically, he had made Kresh complicit in the destruction of everything they should have been protecting. The Sith Empire's survival had depended on remaining hidden. Now they were revealed, locked in a war they might not win, their existence known to a republic that outnumbered them dramatically. If the Republic won this war, they would not stop at defensive victory. They would hunt down every Sith world, would destroy their civilization completely to ensure the threat never rose again. Sadow's ambition had not elevated the Sith, it had endangered their very existence. Kresh made a decision that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstances. He would take his remaining forces into Republic space, not to support Sadow, but to stop him. If the Dark Lord could be eliminated, if Kresh could demonstrate to the Republic that not all Sith supported this war, perhaps terms could be reached. Perhaps the Sith species could survive even if their empire fell. It was a desperate plan, motivated as much by rage as strategy, but it was the only option Kresh could see. That did not end with complete annihilation. He began mobilizing his loyalist forces, preparing for a journey that would take him into the heart of the conflict. The various factions were converging. Republic forces led by Fleet Admiral Eula were slowly tracking the Sith fleet, getting closer to discovering their staging areas. Jory Deregan flew with them, her knowledge of Sith space finally allowing Republic navigators to extrapolate likely locations. Ludo Kresh was gathering his ships for a desperate gambit, and Gav Deregan was steeling himself to betray everything Sadow had taught him. The war was approaching a turning point. The next major battle would determine not just tactical advantage, but the ultimate fate of the conflict. And in his meditation sphere aboard his flagship, Naga Sadow sensed the convergence coming. He felt disturbances in the Force, multiple threads of destiny weaving together toward some crucial moment. He increased security around Gav, not out of explicit suspicion, but general caution. He repositioned his fleet for maximum flexibility, preparing for multiple possible scenarios, and he reached deeper into the dark side than ever before, seeking the power he would need to overcome whatever challenges approached. The galaxy held its breath. Millions had already died, but the truly decisive moments were still ahead. The great hyperspace war was about to enter its bloodiest phase, and none of the participants fully understood how catastrophically it would end. The Battle of Primus Galud began when Republic forces finally tracked Sadow's command ship to the remote system. Fleet Admiral Eula committed 300 vessels, the largest strike force ever assembled. This was the chance to end the war by killing the Sith Supreme Commander. Sadow had chosen the battleground deliberately. The red giant star provided sensor interference, asteroid fields offered ambush points. When the Republic fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found themselves in a carefully prepared trap. The battle erupted with devastating intensity. Capital ships exchanged volleys while starfighters swarmed between them. Republic forces pressed towards Sadow's flagship, taking heavy losses but gaining ground through sheer numerical advantage. Then new ships appeared. Ludo Kresh's fleet, over 100 vessels, dropping from hyperspace. Both sides hesitated, uncertain of his intentions. Kresh answered by firing on Sadow's forces. Sith turned against Sith, while the Republic watched in shock before pressing their advantage. The three-way battle became chaos. Sadow fought on two fronts simultaneously. His formations collapsed. Ships meant to protect his flanks engaged Kresh instead. The psychological impact was devastating as Massassi warriors found themselves killing their own species. Jory Deregan detected her old ship in the Sith formation. She broadcast across every frequency, calling for Gav, begging him to respond. Her voice carried across the battlefield, cutting through military communications. Gav heard her from Sadow's command sphere. The sound of his sister's voice shattered the justifications he had built. All of Sadow's promises, all the dark side philosophy, meant nothing compared to that simple human connection. Sadow sensed Gav's wavering and turned from his tactical displays. He saw the conflict on the young man's face and understood his miscalculation. He began weaving force techniques to crush Gav's resistance, to bind him permanently to the dark side. Gav fought back. His defenses were crude but born of desperate determination. He reached for the command sphere's controls and began transmitting everything. Fleet positions, tactical plans, command codes, every piece of intelligence the Republic needed. Sadow struck with force lightning. Gav channeled it into the systems, overloading safeties while continuing his transmissions. Republic ships immediately began exploiting the intelligence, targeting Sith vessels with surgical precision. The Dark Lord faced an impossible choice. He could kill Gav, but it would require minutes of focus he could not spare. His fleet was disintegrating. Chryse's flagship was closing for a final confrontation. Sadow chose survival over vengeance and ordered a general retreat. Chryse pursued relentlessly, determined to end Sadow personally. His flagship poured fire into Sadow's command vessel. This was his moment to destroy the pretender who had nearly annihilated their civilization. Sadow responded with massive Sith sorcery, creating phantom ships that appeared as Republic reinforcements on every sensor. Chryse, believing himself about to be overwhelmed, committed everything to a final desperate assault on Sadow's flagship. Sadow concentrated all weapons on Chryse's vessel. The rival Dark Lord's shields collapsed. His ship exploded. Ludo Chryse died in the blast, taking the last voice of Sith tradition with him. But the victory was meaningless. Sadow's fleet was shattered. Of hundreds of ships, perhaps 50 remained functional. He ordered them to scatter and flee. The invasion was finished. In the command sphere, Gav lay injured from Sadow's attacks. He accessed the navigation systems one final time. He had noticed something during battle preparations. The red giant was unstable, approaching stellar death. With the techniques Sadow had taught him, it could be pushed over the edge. Gav reached out through the force, touching the star's core, amplifying its instabilities. It was impossible. He lacked the power, but desperation allowed him to achieve what training never could. The star began its collapse towards supernova. Sadow felt the disturbance and understood. He ordered an emergency hyperspace jump, his flagship vanishing seconds before the shockwave hit. Republic forces detected the catastrophe and executed their own emergency withdrawals. Most escaped. Some were too slow and were consumed by the expanding fireball. Gav Darigan remained as the star exploded. His last thought was of Jory, hoping she had escaped. The supernova took him instantly. His body vaporized, but his spirit found peace. He had chosen redemption over power, his sister over his master, humanity over monstrosity. Jory felt him die across the distance. She collapsed sobbing, mourning the brother lost twice. But she also felt his peace, his acceptance, his love in those final moments. The battle ended in mutual devastation. The Sith fleet was destroyed. Chryse was dead. The Republic had won, but at terrible cost. An entire star system had been erased from existence. The Great Hyperspace War was effectively over, but one question remained. Where was Naga Sadow? Sadow's flagship limped through hyperspace, its hull breached in dozens of places, systems failing throughout. The emergency jump had been blind, coordinates chosen for distance rather than destination. When they emerged, sensors showed an uncharted system far from any known space. Only a handful of ships had followed, perhaps 20 vessels from a fleet that once numbered hundreds. The Massassi warriors aboard were confused and demoralized. They had been told they were bringing order to the galaxy. Instead, they had watched their empire burn. Sadow sat alone in what remained of his command sphere, contemplating total defeat. Everything he had built was gone. The invasion had failed catastrophically. The Sith Empire itself was exposed and vulnerable to Republic retaliation. Crash was dead, but so were thousands of Sith warriors. The Golden Age had ended in ashes. Yet even in defeat, his pride remained unbroken. He did not question his vision, only the execution. If Chryse had not interfered, if Gav had not betrayed him, if the Republic had been weaker, his plan would have succeeded. The fault lay with others, never himself. Republic forces were already moving into Sith space. With navigation data from captured ships, they had finally located Korriban, Seduced, and other Sith worlds. The invasion Sadow had feared was now reality, but flowing in the opposite direction. Republic fleets descended on the fractured Sith Empire with overwhelming force. The response was not genocide, though some Republic commanders argued for it. Jedi Masters convinced military leadership that the Sith people were not inherently evil, that their culture could be reformed. Occupation forces established Republic authority, but focused on dismantling military capabilities rather than exterminating populations. Korriban's Valley of the Dark Lords was systematically destroyed. Tombs that had stood for millennia were blasted open, their contents catalogued and removed. Sith holocrons containing dark side knowledge were seized. The goal was to break the cycle, to ensure no future generation could resurrect the warrior culture that had launched this war. On Zysust, resistance was fierce, but ultimately futile. The frozen capital fell after a week of fighting. The council chambers where Dark Lords had ruled for thousands of years became a Republic military headquarters. Sith who surrendered were relocated to controlled territories. Those who continued fighting were eliminated. The Sith Empire ceased to exist as a political entity. Its worlds became Republic protectorates. Its people became refugees in their own space. The civilization that Naga Sadow had sought to elevate was instead destroyed by his ambition. Meanwhile, Sadow's damaged fleet drifted toward an unremarkable yellow star with multiple planets. Sensors detected one world that might support life, a gas giant's fourth moon covered in dense jungle. It was remote, uncharted, perfect for hiding. The landing was barely controlled. Sadow's flagship crashed into the jungle canopy, carving a path of destruction before coming to rest, half buried in vegetation. The surviving ships fared better, though several were too damaged to ever fly again. The moon was called Yavin 4, though Sadow did not know its name. He emerged from his wrecked ship to survey his new prison. Jungle stretched endlessly in every direction. Strange creatures called from the canopy. The air was thick and humid, alien but breathable. Perhaps 200 Massassi had survived the journey. They looked to Sadow for guidance, their minds too altered by alchemy to question or plan independently. He was their god king, and they would serve him regardless of circumstances. Sadow made his decision quickly. If he could not rule the galaxy, he would prepare for those who came after. He would build a fortress, preserve his knowledge, wait for a future generation to find him, and learn from his experiences. His body might age and fail, but Sith techniques could preserve him in suspended animation. He would sleep and dream of future revenge. The Massassi began construction under his direction. They salvaged materials from crashed ships and combined them with local stone. Slowly, a temple began to rise from the jungle floor. The design echoed the pyramids of Korriban, massive ziggurats that spoke of power and permanence. Years passed. The temple complex grew. Sadow conducted alchemical experiments, further mutating his Massassi servants. Their skin darkened, their size increased, their intelligence diminished. They became more beast than sentient, perfectly loyal, but no longer truly alive in any meaningful sense. He created holocrons, recording everything he knew: Sith philosophy, combat techniques, alchemical formulae. He built libraries to house this knowledge, meditation chambers to channel dark side energy, training halls for disciples he believed would someday come. The jungle moon proved rich in force energy. Sadow discovered traces of ancient dark side presence, civilizations that had existed here long before. He built his temples on these nexus points, amplifying their power. 20 years after arriving on Yavin 4, Sadow decided the time had come. His body was failing despite dark side preservation. He had to enter suspended animation now or die, and lose everything. The tomb beneath the main temple was complete. A massive sarcophagus waited, surrounded by alchemical crystals and focusing arrays. The preservation system would keep his body between life and death, his consciousness able to manifest as a force ghost while flesh slept. His last walk through the temple complex carried the weight of finality. He touched walls he had helped build, remembering the funeral duel with Krace, his ascension as Dark Lord, the staged attack on Seduced, the invasion, the betrayals, the defeat. His philosophy remained unchanged. He still believed he had been right. Only circumstances and treachery had prevented success. Future Sith would learn from his mistakes and achieve what he could not. He entered the sarcophagus. Massassi performed final rituals, sealing the tomb according to his instructions. The lid closed. The preservation systems activated. Naga Sadow's breathing slowed to once per hour. His heartbeat became barely detectable. His consciousness drifted into a state between waking and sleeping. His spirit separated from his body, free to roam as a force ghost while flesh waited in stasis. The Massassi sealed the chamber and took up their eternal guard. Generations would pass. Their descendants would continue the vigil, degrading into primitives who maintained the temple through instinct rather than understanding. 600 years later, a fallen Jedi named Exar Kun would discover Yavin 4. He would find Sadow's tomb and awaken the sleeping spirit. The Dark Lord would teach Kun everything, pouring ancient knowledge into an eager mind. Through Kun, Sadow's legacy would live on, spreading corruption across another generation. Millennia after that, the Galactic Empire would build the Death Star. It would orbit Yavin during the Battle of Yavin, drawn to the moon's dark side presence without understanding why. Luke Skywalker would walk where Massassi once served their Dark Master. Sadow's influence never truly died. It echoed across 5,000 years, shaping galactic history in ways no one fully understood. His temples remained, silent teachers to those who sought power without wisdom. His techniques survived in holocrons that changed hands across centuries. Every Sith who came after owed something to the Dark Lord who had dared to challenge the Republic itself. The Great Hyperspace War ended, but its consequences reverberated forever. The Jedi Order, confronted with proof that dark side users existed and would arise again, dedicated themselves to vigilance. The Republic, shocked by how close they had come to defeat, strengthened their military, and in the unknown regions, scattered Sith survivors nursed their hatred, waiting for their own chance at revenge. Jory Daragon lived another 40 years, serving as a Republic senator. She advocated tirelessly for preparedness, for never forgetting the threat that darkness posed. She never married, never moved past the loss of her brother. When she died, her last words were his name. The galaxy turned, empires rose and fell, wars came and went, but on a jungle moon orbiting a gas giant, a sleeping Dark Lord waited in his tomb, dreaming of the day when the Sith would rise again. The first years on Yavin 4 were survival, nothing more. Sadow and his remaining Massassi hunted the jungle's dangerous predators, established defensive perimeters, and began understanding the moon's ecosystem. The wildlife was aggressive but manageable. Stinterils attacked in packs. Woolamanders swung through the canopy. Strange crystalline formations grew in certain areas, resonating with force energy. The moon itself felt alive in ways Sadow had never experienced. Korriban had been saturated with dark side presence, accumulated over millennia, but Yavin 4 was different. The energy here was raw, primal, older than the Sith species itself. Something had existed here long before, some civilization or force tradition that left echoes in the very stones. Sadow spent weeks in meditation, exploring these presences, learning the moon's secrets. He discovered that certain locations acted as natural amplifiers for force abilities. Building on these nexus points would multiply any techniques performed there. It was as if the moon wanted to be used, wanted temples raised upon its surface. Construction began in earnest. Once food and security were established, the Massassi labored endlessly, their genetically engineered strength perfect for moving massive stone blocks. They quarried local rock and salvaged metal from the crashed ships. Under Sadow's direction, the first pyramid began to rise. The design was deliberately similar to Korriban's architecture, not nostalgia, but calculation. If future Sith discovered this place, familiar forms would signal its purpose immediately. The pyramid's angles were mathematically precise, designed to channel force energy toward a central meditation chamber. As construction progressed, Sadow continued his alchemical experiments. The Massassi were already heavily modified, products of generations of Sith breeding programs, but Sadow pushed further. He wanted perfect servants, beings incapable of questioning or betraying, strong enough to guard his temple for centuries. The transformations were gradual but inexorable. Massassi's skin darkened from red to black. Their cranial ridges became more pronounced. Muscles expanded while higher brain functions atrophied. Speech devolved into grunts. Each generation born on Yavin 4 was more primitive than the last. Sadow felt no guilt. These beings existed to serve. If service required sacrificing their sentience, that was acceptable cost. He was creating eternal guardians who would maintain the temple through instinct long after they forgot why. The isolation affected him as well. Conversations with the degrading Massassi became pointless. He began talking to himself or to phantoms of dead rivals. Long debates with imaginary Kresh about whose vision had been correct. Arguments with spectral versions of Gav Daragon about loyalty and betrayal. The line between sanity and madness blurred. Perhaps he crossed it during the 3rd year, or the 7th, or the 15th. Time lost meaning. On Yavin 4, days blended together. Seasons were indistinguishable in the endless jungle heat. Only the temple's growth marked passing years. 5 pyramids eventually rose from the jungle floor. The central temple was largest, its peak visible above the canopy for kilometers. 4 smaller structures surrounded it in a geometric pattern that created a massive force-focusing array. Standing at the center, Sadow could channel power that rivaled anything he had achieved with the entire Sith fleet. He filled the temples with traps, chambers that collapsed on intruders, corridors lined with ancient weapons, rigged to automatic firing patterns, alchemical creatures bred specifically to hunt within the tight passages. Any tomb raider seeking treasure would find only death. But for those who approached with proper knowledge and respect, the temples offered incredible rewards. Holocrons containing every technique Sadow had mastered. Libraries with texts on Sith philosophy spanning thousands of years. Meditation chambers where one could commune directly with the dark side's deepest mysteries. The throne room at the central temple's heart became Sadow's primary residence. He sat there for hours, sometimes days, lost in meditation or memory. The throne itself was carved from a single massive crystal that amplified force sensitivity. Sitting there, Sadow could sense disturbances across light years, feel ripples in the cosmic force that hinted at galactic events. He felt the Republic's occupation of Sith space, felt Korriban's tombs being violated, felt the death of Sith culture under Republic administration. Each violation was a knife in his pride, but he was powerless to intervene. His body was aging despite dark side preservation. His connection to the physical world was weakening. The Massassi worshipped him as a god. Their degraded minds could no longer comprehend political structures or military hierarchies. To them, Sadow was not a leader, but a divine being whose will shaped reality. They built shrines to him throughout the temple complex, performed blood sacrifices in his honor, created a primitive religion centered on his sleeping form. Sadow allowed and even encouraged this worship. The devotion fed his power, created emotional resonance that sustained him when his body failed. The Massassi's faith became a kind of life support, keeping him connected to the physical world through sheer force of their belief. 20 years after landing, the tomb was complete. Deep beneath the central temple, in a chamber carved from solid bedrock and lined with alchemical crystals, the sarcophagus waited. Sadow had designed it himself, incorporating every preservation technique known to Sith science. The system was elegant in its complexity. The crystals would maintain a stasis field that slowed cellular decay to near zero. Dark side energy channeled through the temple's focusing array would sustain his force presence. His body would sleep, but his spirit could roam, could manifest to those who sought his knowledge. He spent his final days above ground preparing for the transition. He recorded final holocrons, last messages to future generations. He gave instructions to the Massassi priests, though he suspected they would degenerate into cargo cult behavior within a few generations. He walked the temple grounds one last time, touching stones he had helped place, remembering everything that had led to this moment. The descent into the tomb was ceremonial. Massassi lined the corridors, chanting in their degraded language. Torches lit the way down through chambers and passages until Sadow reached the deepest level. The sarcophagus room was exactly as he had designed it, cold and dark and perfect. He removed his outer robes and donned the burial garments prepared for this moment. Sith ceremonial armor, ancient and powerful, marking him as Dark Lord even in death. He lay in the sarcophagus, positioning himself carefully, arms crossed over his chest in the traditional pose. The Massassi activated the crystals. Energy flowed through circuits carved into stone. The temperature dropped rapidly as the stasis field engaged. Sadow felt his body going numb, his breathing slowing, his heartbeat becoming barely perceptible. His consciousness separated. The physical form remained in the sarcophagus, preserved perfectly, while his spirit rose free. He could see through walls, through stone, through time itself. Past and future blurred together. He saw himself as Dark Lord, saw the invasion, saw the defeat, saw Yavin 4's jungles growing wild above his tomb. And he saw further, saw future visitors, saw dark side users drawn to this place across centuries, saw a fallen Jedi named Exar Kun finding the tomb 600 years hence, saw himself teaching Kun everything, corrupting him completely, using him to strike at the galaxy once more. The vision brought satisfaction. He had not failed, had only been delayed. His knowledge would survive. His philosophy would endure. Future Sith would rise using techniques he had preserved. The war between light and dark would continue, and he would be part of it, teaching from beyond death. The Massassi sealed the tomb. Massive stone blocks slid into place, cutting off the chamber from the world above. They would stand guard, they and their descendants, for millennia. The jungle would reclaim the clearing around the temples. Vines would cover the stones, but the structures would endure, waiting for those destined to find them. Naga Sadow slept, and in sleeping, dreamed of empires falling, dreamed of his return, dreamed of the day when the Sith would rise again and finish what he had started. The centuries rolled past Yavin 4 like waves against an ancient shore. The jungle grew and died and grew again. The Massassi degraded further with each passing generation, forgetting language, forgetting purpose, remembering only that the temples must be guarded and the tomb must never be disturbed. 100 years after Sadow's entombment, The last Massassi who remembered him as a living being died. The next generation knew him only through primitive religious stories, a god who slept beneath stone and would someday wake to lead them again. Another 100 years, and even those stories simplified into base mythology, symbols without understanding. But the temples endured. The jungle could not reclaim what Sith alchemy had built. Vines covered the stones, but did not break them. Rain eroded surfaces, but could not penetrate the dark side-infused architecture. The pyramids stood eternal, dark monuments in an endless sea of green. Deep in his tomb, Sadow's body remained perfectly preserved, existing in the space between life and death. His heartbeat came once every 1,000 breaths. His cells aged at a rate so slow that 1,000,000 years would not turn him to dust. The stasis field held perfectly, maintained by crystals that drew power from the moon's natural force resonance. His spirit was free. It roamed the temples, observed the Massassi descendants, and occasionally manifested to creatures sensitive enough to perceive it. The Woolamanders learned to avoid certain areas where the ghost was strongest. Predators found other hunting grounds when phantom presences drove them away. 300 years after his entombment, a damaged Republic scout ship stumbled upon the Yavin system. The crew detected life signs on the fourth moon, but found the jungle too hostile for detailed exploration. They noted the system in their logs and moved on, never realizing what lay beneath the canopy. 400 years, and 4 sensitive individuals across the galaxy began having dreams of a jungle moon and ancient temples. The visions were fragmented, incomplete, but persistent. Some dismissed them as meaningless. Others followed the dreams, journeying to the outer rim, searching for a place that matched the images. Most never found it. A few did. They landed on Yavin 4, explored the temples, encountered the Massassi, who either fled or attacked, depending on unknown factors. Some died in the traps Sadow had prepared. Others found holocrons, learned fragments of dark side technique, and carried that knowledge back to the wider galaxy. 600 years after Sadow's defeat, a Jedi named Exar Kun began his fall to the dark side. Brilliant, ambitious, and convinced the Jedi Order's restrictions were holding him back, he sought forbidden knowledge. Ancient texts mentioned a Dark Lord who had nearly conquered the Republic millennia ago, whose tomb supposedly held incredible secrets. Kun followed the clues obsessively. He traced references through corrupted holocrons, interviewed hermits who claimed Force visions, studied navigation records for systems matching the descriptions. Years of research finally led him to Yavin 4. When his ship descended through the atmosphere, Sadow's spirit stirred. It had waited so long for this moment, for a Force user powerful enough to be worth teaching, hungry enough to embrace the dark side completely. Exar Kun was perfect, already halfway to corruption, needing only a final push. The Massassi did not attack Kun. Sadow's ghost influenced their primitive minds, making them see the fallen Jedi as a prophet sent by their sleeping god. They led him through the jungle to the central temple, down corridors they had guarded without understanding, to the sealed chamber deep beneath stone. Sadow manifested fully for the first time in centuries. His Force ghost appeared before Kun, towering and terrible, radiating power that made the young Jedi step back in awe. The Dark Lord spoke, his voice echoing from beyond death, offering everything Kun desired. Power beyond Jedi limits, knowledge the Order refused to teach, the chance to become something greater than any Jedi Master. Kunai listened, learned, embraced the corruption eagerly. Sadow poured 600 years of meditation and refinement into his new student, techniques improved through centuries of spiritual practice. He taught Kunai to dominate the Massassi through the Force, to use the temples as amplifiers for his abilities, to create Sith artifacts using methods lost since the Golden Age. Through Exar Kun, Naga Sadow struck at the galaxy once more. Kun launched his own war, the Great Sith War, rallying fallen Jedi to his cause and nearly destroying the Republic. It took the combined might of the Jedi Order to stop him, and even then they could only trap him on Yavin 4, binding his spirit to the temples. Sadow's sarcophagus remained sealed throughout. His body continued its endless sleep, while his ghost watched his students rise and fall. When Republic forces bombarded the temples after Khan's defeat, the structures held. Massive craters appeared in the jungle, but the pyramids endured, protected by alchemy older and more powerful than modern weapons. 1,000 years passed. 2,000. The galaxy forgot Naga Sadow's name even as his influence persisted. Every Sith who arose, whether knowing it or not, used techniques that traced back to holocrons he created. Every dark side user who sought ancient knowledge eventually found paths leading to his temples. 3,000 years after his entombment, the Sith species was extinct, but the Sith philosophy survived. Darth Bane discovered Sadow's teachings through intermediate sources and used them to create the Rule of Two, ensuring the Sith would never be destroyed completely again. One master, one apprentice, an unbroken chain of corruption stretching across millennia. 4,000 years, and the old Republic fell, replaced by Palpatine's galactic empire. The Emperor, most powerful dark side user in a millennium, felt Yavin 4's presence across the galaxy. He visited once, walking the temples, examining the architecture, never realizing the system's true significance. When the Empire built the Death Star, Palpatine ordered it positioned near Yavin during the Rebel Alliance's critical moment, officially for tactical reasons to threaten their base. But perhaps something deeper guided that choice. Perhaps Sadow's ghost, still bound to Yavin 4, unconsciously influenced events, drawing galactic powers to the moon where he slept. Luke Skywalker walked where Massassi had worshipped. He flew missions over jungles hiding ancient temples. The Force guided him without his understanding why this place felt significant. He destroyed the Death Star and saved the rebellion, never knowing a Dark Lord from 5,000 years past had indirectly shaped that moment. The New Republic era brought archaeologists to Yavin 4. They excavated the temples carefully, cataloging Massassi artifacts and Sith holocrons. They found layer upon layer of history, civilizations built on civilizations, dark side traditions stretching back before recorded time. They never found Sadow's actual tomb. The deepest chambers remained sealed, protected by techniques archaeology could not penetrate. Sensors could not reach through the Force-imbued stone. Excavation attempts mysteriously failed, equipment malfunctioning for no apparent reason. The sarcophagus remained undisturbed, its occupant sleeping peacefully while the galaxy turned overhead. 5,000 years had passed since the Great Hyperspace War. Empires had risen and fallen, species had evolved and gone extinct. Technologies advanced beyond anything Sadow's era had imagined. But in his tomb beneath Yavin 4, the Dark Lord remained unchanged, preserved perfectly, waiting in darkness. His legacy was complex and contradictory. He had nearly destroyed the Sith species through his ambition, but he had also preserved their knowledge when it would have been lost. He had launched a catastrophic war, but that war had revealed the Sith to the galaxy, ensuring they would never be truly forgotten. Every subsequent conflict between light and dark traced back, in some way, to that first Great War. The Jedi vigilance against the dark side stemmed from confronting Sadow's invasion. The Sith persistence despite repeated defeats came from knowledge he preserved. The eternal cycle of war and peace that defined galactic history had arguably begun the moment his fleet emerged from hyperspace above Coruscant 5 millennia ago. Jori Darigan's sacrifice, warning the Republic, despite knowing they would not initially believe her, had saved countless lives. Gav Darigan's redemption, stopping the invasion at the cost of his own existence, had shown that even the corrupted could find their way back. Their story became legend, then myth, then a cautionary tale about the seductive nature of power. The Massassi were gone now, the last dying millennia ago, but their temples remained, slowly crumbling but still standing, still radiating dark side presence. Pilgrims from a dozen Force traditions visited Yavin 4, some seeking knowledge, others seeking to understand the past, all finding something in those ancient stones. In the absolute darkness of his sealed tomb, Naga Sadow dreamed. His consciousness drifted through layers of time, observing without influencing, learning without teaching. He saw what his ambition had wrought, saw the civilizations destroyed and created in his wake, saw the chain of events stretching forward from his choices. Did he feel regret? The answer was complex. He regretted failure, but not attempt, regretted the cost to the Sith species, but not his vision of conquest, regretted betrayals, but not his manipulations. Even after 5,000 years, his essential nature remained unchanged. He was Naga Sadow, Dark Lord of the Sith, and he would not have chosen differently given another chance. His body slept, his spirit watched, and the galaxy, forgetting and remembering in cycles, continued its eternal dance between light and darkness, order and chaos, the legacy of one ambitious Dark Lord woven into the fabric of galactic destiny forever. The night settles over Yavin 4 as it has for 5,000 years. The gas giant Yavin hangs massive in the sky, its orange glow painting the jungle canopy in warm light. The temples stand silent beneath vines and moss, ancient stones holding their secrets close. Strange creatures call from the darkness, the same songs their ancestors sang when Naga Sadow first arrived. Deep beneath the central pyramid, the Dark Lord sleeps his endless sleep, his body preserved, his spirit quiet now, his dreams fading into the cosmic background. The story complete, the cycle understood. Ambition burned so bright it consumed everything around it, leaving only ruins and lessons carved in stone. Somewhere across the galaxy, other beings rise and fall, other empires bloom and wither. The Force flows through all of it, balancing light and dark, creation and destruction, the endless turning of existence. Sadow's story is just one thread in an infinite tapestry, significant but not unique. Every generation produces those who believe they can reshape the galaxy through will alone. Most fail, all leave scars. The lesson is simple but difficult. Power without wisdom destroys what it touches. Ambition without compassion leaves only emptiness. Victory without understanding means nothing in the end. Sadow achieved immortality through his teachings, but the cost was everything he claimed to value. The temples dream beneath their jungle covering. The gas giant rotates slowly overhead. The stars wheel in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the dramas playing out beneath them. And on this moon, on this forgotten world, the past sleeps peacefully, waiting for nothing, expecting nothing, simply existing in the eternal now. Rest comes naturally here, the weight of history settling like a blanket, the jungle's rhythm becoming your breath, the Force flowing gently, carrying you toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the quiet understanding that all things pass and all stories end. May the Force be with you always, in sleeping and in waking.